Hi, welcome to my presentation. My name is Melanie Barron, and I will be talking about the effects of breakfast on student performance. The title had nothing to do with the Breakfast Club movie. I just wanted to use the name as a hook, just as a disclaimer there. All right, let's get started. So here's a brief summary of what I'll be covering today. So we have the introduction, the research question, hypothesis, and variables, the methodology, the results, the discussion, and the conclusion. So, not everyone here is an early bird, therefore breakfast is often skipped or maybe even substituted with just coffee as students try to grab those extra minutes contemplating life in bed. With that in mind, the brain does require energy to function through using nutrition and with rest to do tasks properly. This is studied more thoroughly in a 2003 study by Fanita et al. They look at different approaches to breakfast and its effects. But to bring it back, as students, it is such a struggle to balance both nutrition and rest when the workload is overwhelming and the time is ticking. You may all have heard as well that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, which is a statement mentioned in a 2014 by Zilberter, who looked at if we should skip breakfast or not. But what exactly does the effect have on student performance? Provided that the research question of the study is, does breakfast have an impact on whether students can perform well in class? I came up with the hypothesis, which the null is, where I stated that student performance will not have a positive effect by eating breakfast, while the alternative hypothesis is where I believed that student performance would have a positive effect by eating breakfast. Following that, the variables, my independent variable is what I did not have control over, which was whether a student consumed breakfast or not, while my dependent variable of the study is where I used a scale that I made myself to score on how a student did on their quizzes and exams, along with retaining lecture information. With the participants, there was an inclusion of 15 out of 29 students of my PTA cohort, which I announced that it was totally optional to be a part of. They did not have to be a part of it, and I got 15 out of 29 with no exclusions there. Granted that, how the study was conducted was by a non-experimental method by using an online Google form, which is right there on the side. All the answers and participants remain anonymous to provide a safe space, as well to avoid any fear of being shamed if they did not perform well than they thought they did. And like I mentioned before, I made up the scale, which was rated 1 to 5, 1 being that they performed poorly, and 5 that they performed exceptional. As a result, here are some of the screenshots from my study. I like that these were already made in the pie chart for me, and I had some interesting results. So the first question I asked on the form was, how often do you eat breakfast? And it's interesting. 6 answered yes, 2 answered almost every day, 2 answered if I had the time to, and 2 answered nope, nobody got time for that. Following that, I asked, do you eat breakfast before lecture? It was nearly split across the room, but when it came to eating before a morning quiz or test, 10 answered yes and 5 answered no. Next up, I asked on how they did on a Kahoot quiz. Kahoot is what we use for anatomy classes, so these are not actually graded, but they still do challenge our brains in the morning. We had 10 answer yes to eating breakfast, where the performance of those students were all over the chart, with most doing just average on the quiz, and those who did not, a couple did well, and a couple just did okay. Also to note, it is not posted on here on this presentation, but I also asked a bonus question on how they did on a 8 a.m. PTA exam, which was graded. And the answers were all over the place as well. Those who did eat breakfast did a range between average and exceptional. Those who did not eat breakfast actually had put down more 4s and 5s. So in this case, I had to accept the null hypothesis and reject the alternative because there's not enough evidence to prove that consumption of breakfast had a positive effect on student performance. Henceforth, there are many limitations to this mini research study. There was a small population involved. There was no control over the participants to see if there was a cause and effect. And I also did ask another bonus question, which was, what other factors do you think could affect your performance with these morning, early, afternoon quizzes or tests? That was totally optional, and you can see the results there. A lot of people put sleep, time management, stress, not following their usual routine. So thus, for future studies, I would definitely like to make a note that this type of study should possibly be done as an experiment so that there could be more control over the variables and the other factors, it may be possible to isolate those other factors as well to see the actual correlation and causation of the experiment, which is something that we talked about in chapter 2 of the Science of Psychology by King. And next up, ultimately, even though the alternative hypothesis was rejected, high school and college students can still learn and benefit from the study because health, nutrition, and education are all very important of the developmental years of young adulthood. And in addition, this study shows that students go through a similar journey together and are not alone in this process. This research can lead and be a stepping stone for new studies that can give more of a conclusive answer if breakfast and can affect student performance. Thank you for listening, and please let me know if you have any questions. Also, here is my bibliography, which I used to reference other studies in my research.